Hello and welcome to Coffee with Artists. This is a chat series that we're hosting with Westville artists as part of New Haven's citywide open studios. And today we will be chatting with Susan McCaslin,
Mhm.
Roy Money, and me, Rebekah Fraser. So we're gonna start. We're just gonna dive right in. We're all Westville artists, and we, through our own private conversations, have discovered some similarities in our work as well as some pretty interesting differences. So we hope you enjoy the conversation. But let's start by talking about what's inspiring you. Roy, would you like to begin by sharing what inspires you?
Sure. Um, well, what inspires me is being out the in the woods, uh, by the beach. I grew up in the South in a rural area. Both of my parents grew up on a farm, and although I've now spent most of my life in the Northeast, um, that's a very special place to me, and that's where I feel most at home with a camera. Um, when I was a child, I used to spend a lot of time just wandering in the woods, and I still feel that way. Um,
Roy, I just want to say now I suddenly understand why our work is so similar because I grew up in almost the exact same situation. Although my parents didn't have a farm, but we lived in between two farms, and the son of one farmer would drive through our driveway past our house to go get the cows at his father's farm and coming back. And so go on. I love hearing that because now I get
yeah.
it.
Well, the photography that most people in New Haven are familiar with that I've done is basically landscape photography or nature photography, as some people call it, which I'm a little uncomfortable with because I don't think of nature as being something outside us. You know, we carry nature inside us. But it's certainly true that for the last 10 years or so, I've been focused on, excuse the pun, landscape photography. And one of the key things in that was going to visit my son in China after he graduated from college. He was he moved to China, and he's still in the East Asia, and traveling around China, I was just so inspired by the very different cultural ethos that they have about the natural world. And, um, and so when I came back, I became even more interested in photographing in East Rock Park and Hammonasset and places like that. And that continues to be my principal interest in photographing.
I think your work has a really a Zen feel to it as well, which I don't know if it always did or if it's just select pieces that I've seen, Roy, but it does remind me of, it seems to have that Eastern influence, and I love and a meditative feel. And I love what you say about nature being inside us as well, because that's that's also what I feel, and what inspires me is the not only the outer landscape and nature but also the inner landscape, and what happens through meditation. So a lot of my paintings are either from a meditation. In other words, I'm sitting in meditation and an image emerges in my mind that I then paint, or the painting is actually a meditation in itself, where I kind of go into a meditative state and then just allow that to express itself through the physicality of the pen on the paper or the paintbrush on the canvas.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it's interesting because mine, it comes from a completely the same space but different space in that talking about childhood and just wandering through the woods, I would do the same, but looking for secret things. And I would find, you know, certain places where branches were leaning down and I could sit under there, and that would make this little secret space for myself. And the house that I grew up in was from the early 1800s. And there were a lot of secret spaces in there too, because it had been an inn for, what was it? The canal went right by. So the guys that would be on the canal with their donkeys, they would put the donkeys in a barn and they would sleep overnight in the house I grew up in. So there were lots of little rooms and little closets and stuff. And but as you were talking about meditative state, I did just realize recently that my work only comes to me based on not trying anything at all. Allowing, like the piece I have up right now is, I didn't come up with the idea to do it. I was invited to do something, and going there and just allowing it to grow in front of me is what happened, the idea. So it's the same kind of idea. I can't force it. I have to allow it to just happen. It all has, either something has to click, a word has to be said, a space has to look a certain way, which is another reason why I do photography also, but I don't show it. But I love walking through the woods and finding things to photograph, to remember. So
yeah, I do the same. I was a photographer. I mean, I guess I've always been a photographer, and grew up in my cousin's darkroom. She's quite a bit older than me. So she was developing photographs, and I was a kid, like, you know, it's so excited about putting the paper in the fixative and the, you know, whatever else, watching images emerge on the paper is the coolest thing. And I also spent a lot of time in nature as a child, but we also moved around a lot. So I don't think of that as an influence so much. But there is something about taking pieces from the environment, whatever that is. And so lately, you know, for the last 10 years or so, that's included taking things that I find or that I've used and can't continue to use, and making fashion from it. So like this necklace.
Oh, is that what your necklace is?
Yeah, it's batteries and
oh, that's so nice.
Electrical wire that I found on the street, and duct tape. You know, I had to.
One of my pet peeves is people who talk about capturing things with their camera, because, you know, it's if they're out hunting and they're going to take possession of some object or creature.
Yeah.
And I prefer to think, and I think it's more accurate in terms of my process, about looking for circumstances to be captured myself by what I see, where I'm not so, I don't go out with, as I think you were saying, Susan, I don't go out with something in particular in mind, but I go out and try to be in a frame of mind where I can really notice what's around me and be able to resonate with something and have that sort of determine how I take the picture or make the picture, rather than thinking of it in some sort of more aggressive subject/object oriented way.
Roy, this is a great time, I think, for you to show us some of your work as you talk about your process. You've just kind of segued nicely into that.
Okay. Let's see. All right. Okay. I have been, for the last few months, going back to black and white after spending several years working almost exclusively in color. And one of the reasons that I've done that is to try to get away from the picture as a sort of more objective thing out there that has been photographed, and inspire more involvement with the picture because it's not strictly something you might see if you were standing there. So I've gone back to black and white because it feels like a more elemental way to see the world and to get away from the sort of strictly, realistic aspect of color landscapes. In addition, with this photograph and having trouble getting this, okay. With this photograph and some others I'm going to show you. Yeah, here we go. Not only is it in black and white, but I have moved the camera during the exposure. And that's also a way that I'm trying to explore the possibility of evoking a more sort of subjective experience of what's in the picture, and also to sort of allude to the fact that what we see is not permanent. It's constantly changing and can be very elusive, and not everyone's perception is the same. And so what I'm trying to explore here is the sense that perception is much more complex and sort of vulnerable to the individual's perception and what they bring to it than one might conventionally think. Now, most of these are actually pictures from my artist residency at Weir Farm, which happened last year. And although the pictures that I have showed at an exhibition last October, I think it was, at Caladel Gallery, were in color and were more fixed time exposures. These are a bit different. I think there might, no, that's the last one.
Beautiful.
So I'll go back.
They really are.
These
I love them.
all the pieces I was referring to before that do have a Zen feel, but these don't. These are really evocative and like I almost feel like they're yelling at me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but not in a bad way, but it's giving me the sense that like the forest is speaking to me. And
the voices in the forest, yeah.
Yeah, where so many nature photographs, they're kind of placid and but these I feel like I'm really hearing the voices of nature, calling me to pay attention.
Well, there's
the one with that big tree trunk is so that trunk is so standing watch so strongly. It's just, I love that piece so much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, some of the things you've said, because one of my influences has been a book by a writer by the name of David Abram, who talks about the sentient earth, the way that the earth and its what we call natural inhabitants, are not these sort of, how to put it? They're alive, they're alive. There's a wonderful book that I just saw a review of this week by someone who's written in the Atlantic about the sounds of trees. There's a poet who has written a book about the sounds of trees and how he has spent a lot of time going and listening to trees and the different sounds that the rain makes on the leaves of different trees and things like this. So,
Roy, Roy, did you happen to attend? It was like 2 years ago at the Yale School of Forestry. They had an event where they connected certain trees to sound systems. And so you could go around the, it was outdoors. You could go around the hill that they had set up with all these different trees, and you could listen to the music that these trees were making. I mean, it was so cool. I
I
did,
would have loved to have known about that. That sounds like it's right up my alley.
yeah, I'll have
Yeah.
to send you the recordings. It's funny that you mentioned David Abram because I haven't yet read his work, but I am currently editing a book by an author who introduced me to David Abram's work and, is heavily influenced. So anyway,
Yeah, I was once at a week-long meditation, and when we would take a break, we would go outside and we'd each sit next to a tree, and we would just commune with the tree. And it was really powerful because the tree really would, after the third or fourth day of this, the tree really would start communicating with you. It was really amazing. Yeah. I've got to read that, David Abrams. That sounds great.
Well, he's written a couple of books, but the first one, which is probably the one that's received the most attention and acclaim, was called The Spell of the Sensuous.
Yeah. Great title too.
Yeah.
So did you have more that you wanted to show us to elucidate your process?
Well, I will say, not that I will have anything else to show you, but you mentioned the connection to Zen, and as Susan knows, that's something it's been very important to me, and I think that was a connection I made when I visited China in 2008, I guess it was. There are these famous gardens in Suzhou, China, and when I was in several of those gardens, I felt just completely at home in a way that seemed paradoxical, given that I was on the other side of the globe. But they're basically gardens that have been cultivated and preserved that date back to classical Chinese period when Taoism and Chan, which is the precursor to Zen, was very important and influential.
So, so my process, I mean, I'm going to focus on the visual art, but I'm also a writer. So I have a few different processes that all kind of intermingle. And I really didn't start painting seriously until a few years ago. Prior to that, I just painted badly, and then made trash fashion. So the trash fashion, although these are more recent pieces, um, which are upcycled. It's really inspired by my environmentalism, my passion for recycling, for upcycling, the interest that I have with found objects. The sweaters that comprise this one sweater were pieces that I, bought for myself and then tired of, and or they got holes in them or whatever. So I repurposed them, but with the exception of the one pair of glasses that's at the top, the other three were broken glasses I found on the street when I was out walking. So part of it is I don't like to see things on the ground that don't belong there, and part of it is I just find found objects interesting. So this is another piece that's just made from multiple sweaters that, for whatever reason, weren't working. There's like a bit of a car mirror that I found on the street, and The confetti was made from discarded credit cards and IDs and things that I just punched, turned into confetti with a hole punch. Upcycled fabric. It's got, I don't know if I can zoom in on this. It's got, a charging cord for a phone and the earbuds that no longer work, macrameed together. Um, a little reflector that I found on the street. So my influences in trash fashion, were really about environmentalism and play, having fun, making something useful and in some ways beautiful from what was trash. And then that also influenced me once I started painting seriously. Um, then I discovered that I could also turn my canvases into articles of clothing. So this piece, um, is kind of a fun vest. This is a little jacket that at City Wide Open Studios last year, people were coming in and trying on the little jackets. This is a young fashion designer, actually, Andrew Bottinger, New Haven-based fashion designer. He's working with Neville Wisdom now, apprenticing with him, but he really enjoys those pieces. So, and in fact, he was actually the one who inspired me to start sewing my canvases into garments. So, and this is that same piece, except I'm the one wearing it now at the opening of City Wide Open Studios last year. But you can see the kind of Zen influence, although I ended up cutting and sewing around it. At a residency at Vermont Studio Center, I was really there to write, but we had these daily opportunities to to go into a studio with a live model and draw, and I had never had that opportunity before. So it was a lot of fun and really helped me to evolve my writing process as well, being able to just sit and focus on a figure and draw, not necessarily very well, but there's that. And but the main thing, at least for the purposes of this talk, is is the painting that just really comes out of. This is the first piece where I was studying with Kwejo Adai, and I walked into his studio and he asked what I wanted to paint. I said, I don't know. And he said, well, meditate in front of the easel and then start sketching. And so I did, and I opened my eyes and started, drawing these lines, and I didn't know what it was. I was just moving with, what was emerging from that meditation, and I thought, oh, this is fun. It's going to be some sort of paisley pattern. But then I kept making lines, and then I looked at it and I was like, oh, that's not a paisley pattern. That's the inside of a woman. Like, okay, so now we're turning this into a celebration of the feminine, and and since then, really, that's all that my paintings have been. They've just become this either a moving meditation, as this piece is, or coming from a vision that I had in a meditation, like this piece, which I call Third Eye. As my meditation process has changed, which since the pandemic I've been practicing Kundalini yoga, my painting has changed. So, I'm seeing these eyes all the time, which is fun when there's like one or two. Right now I'm surrounded by my artwork, and it's just because of City Wide Open Studios. So I'm surrounded by eyes. It's starting to get a little obtrusive. But yeah, my process is really kind of it's both simple and complex. I'm always playing with the techniques. I use I call it control and release, because there's the aspect of the painting that I really want control over, and then there's the aspect that I just let go. So this is a good example of that. Um, and I think, and here's another example of eyes that are, but one of my more recent pieces, in fact, the piece that's behind me right now, which you can't see because I'm sharing my screen, is the one that I was painting in this video, which hopefully, oh, sorry, we can hear it. This is an unedited video that I was going to do for Citywide Open Studios, but in this instance, you can see, you know, I was putting the final details of this piece. So I often, you know, in terms of my process, I have an easel, but I often paint on the table so that I can throw paint around and use a lot of water and make a little bit more of a mess without destroying my walls.
Mm.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. So, and here's that piece right behind me.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
That's lovely.
So, yeah, this is about, it was just a way of processing. You know, I think, I don't know how many artists talk about this, but I know for me, a lot of the things come out of meditation, and it's a way of just, you know, processing life. And right now, you know, we're in this pandemic, and it's a very stressful time for everybody. And I had, you know, a death of a loved one, and that helped me to process
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. I like that video of you painting very much. I think that you know, we don't see those. We see studio visits where people are actually walking around in their studio, but we don't see people actually making the work, which is, that's kind of inspires me to do something like that, because my process of making the pieces that go into my work is really an important part of my work. It's just nobody gets to see it. So
Right.
yeah, that was really, and I love the clothing idea too, the pieces of that. So are you continuing with that also while you're doing your painting?
Well, I haven't been for two reasons. One is that my sewing machine broke at in like February, and I have thought about getting it fixed, and I actually have chosen not to, because I have been really focused on finishing this novel and starting the next one. So I'm finishing the fourth novel and trying to get that ready for publication, and then working on the concept for the fifth novel, um, and painting. And I was recording the audiobook for a nonfiction book that I published a couple of years ago, and we turned that into a podcast. So I've been just, you know, working so much that as much as I miss sewing and am having ideas for trash fashion, I feel like right now it would just be too much. So
And also you were doing local lit too, which is local lit at Lotta, which is
yeah,
a lot of work too. So
oh, so
yeah.
much work. It was wonderful. I'm so glad we did that. But we did finally, we had our last event in July.
Hmm.
So, which we recorded. It was the first and only one that we recorded because we had to do it on Zoom. Um, but yeah, so there was just a lot.
I know, you know, it's funny because you would think with this pandemic, with all the alone time that you would be, not you, one, myself, I would be more focused. And I find I'm less focused and I'm taking on way too many things because I'm kind of jumping around and trying to find a focus. And I'm not, it's odd to me that I wouldn't just be thinking, well, this is great. I can't go outside. I might as well sit and work in my studio, but it's very distracting. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's really interesting to, go ahead.
Oh, I think for me the saving grace that's like kept me very productive is the fact that my modes of creation feed each other. So
Hmm.
when I take the time to paint, I'm not thinking about story and not thinking about writing, and I'm doing something that you know is an expression that I love that resonates with people. Um, but then when I'm writing, I'm not thinking about painting, but often because writing is my primary form of creative expression. I can do that while I am taking a walk, or I can record things. I can record a chapter into my phone and then refine it on the page later.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so that's really helpful to me. I'm really glad that I have more than one mode of self-expression. Although for a while there, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was recording a lot of music,
Hmm.
uh, and without any intention of like ever trying to sell it. It just was something I needed to do, and it was great. But it also did, in some way, feel like a real distraction. So there's so many avenues, like you say, Susan, of like, oh, and
Yeah.
I can do this and that, and so I'm trying to
Yeah.
really like
Yeah.
hone on what my dharma
Right.
is.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about the centrality of meditation in your expressions. Uh, I think it's different with the two of you because you're, uh, shall we say, plastic artists or additive artists. One of the distinctions that's often made between photography and painting and other visual arts is that photography is subtractive. You're always dealing with something out there that you're trying to put a frame around. Whereas
Hmm.
in the kind of things that both of you do, it's it's sort of starting out with essentially nothing and adding things as you go along and subtracting, of course, as you go as well.
Yeah.
But in photography, it's all about framing. But for me, although I have a daily meditation practice, when I go out with my camera, or when I'm at home working with the exposures that I've brought back, that is a very meditative process for me. I mean, I'm just really trying to let whatever I see come into me and inhabit me, and and try to notice what the response is and have that direct me. Um, but
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear someone talk about having the meditation lead directly onto a canvas or some three-dimensional kind of form.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
oh, that's fun. Yeah, and also into onto the page in terms of writing as well. It really comes out in all sorts of ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah, and I've learned to not judge that because, as many meditation practices, the focus is that you're supposed to not be thinking, but as a creative person, dropping into that space of not thinking is then like this wellspring of things that want to come out.
Yeah.
So there's a balance of like, okay, all right, thank you. That's an interesting idea, thought. I'm going to try and set that aside and not lose it, and go back to the focus of the meditation. But then there's another one, and there's another one, and I guess um, I'd rather have those thoughts emerging than the stressful thoughts, which sometimes also come
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a famous Zen teacher by the name of Dogen who said that what what you what you should try to do or try to cultivate is thinking, not thinking.
Mm.
Oh,
And I find it hard just to get my head around that. But,
yeah.
the idea is to let the thoughts flow without trying to arrange them and just have them flow out. the same way flowers grow and trees grow and we grow.
Yeah. Right. Oh, that's brilliant.
And disintegrate.
Yeah, and disintegrate.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
grow down. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Susan, did you are you ready to share?
Well, you know what what I'm gonna do is share my website, because I think it's easier to get to that. So really my inspiration, as I had said in the beginning, is really about stuff from my background and my childhood that had really.
I can't see your email. Okay.
Yeah, here it's coming. Can you see it?
Yeah, now we can see your website.
Okay, good.
All right.
Inspiration from growing up in a very isolated place. I spent a lot of time just wandering around looking at a lot of things that, I would be walking through the woods, and the things that would catch my eye were detritus kind of things, that they were things that had broken off, like maybe a piece of metal that had fallen off of a truck, or possibly there was some kind of a plant that had these kind of sticky grapefruit kind of things. And I would look for those and I would collect those. And sometimes I would take some of my stuff, like little tea sets, and go out in the woods and have a little tea party, and then I would leave them there, because I would sort of make up this idea that somebody else would come along and use them, and then I'd go back to see if they'd been moved or anything. So my work really is about that kind of discovery, and discovery of things that have had use or that have been pre-owned. My mother and I would go to a lot of antique shops, and she was a poet, and she wrote novels also, and she had written a poem about how these things that she owned, like the table that we would sit, and the scratches that were on the table that didn't come from our family, came from a previous family, and how the table would then go on to another family, and that these are all kind of spirits that are left in the objects. So that's really where a lot of my work comes from. It also comes from kind of my parents were very argumentative and had some issues. So I spent a lot of time too going into my own little spaces and keeping myself sort of away from that other stuff that was going on. So it's this piece that you're looking at right now is at the Eli Center of Contemporary Art. And I do want to just show you what the space looked like. Let's see, shot. This is the space at the building. It's on the side of the building. And when I got there, I first wanted to build a wall that would, where those bricks are, there would be a standing wall with these pieces on it. And I realized that there was just no way to put it there safely. And I knew that the people who owned the building would probably argue with me about it if there was a hurricane. And this is hurricane season, who knows what would happen to those 4x8 sheets of plywood. So again, it's sort of necessity is the mother of invention. So I went back and I thought, well, I really like this space. What can I do? So I decided to take those same pieces and fill up that space. As you're standing on the wall and look down at it, this is what you see. And it has that feeling of that the roof had been redone, and this is what was taken off of the roof and discarded. But because, it was kind of a hidden space. So if that had happened and nobody had bothered to clean up this one space. I have another image of it that is, I don't think I have on the website yet.
What are those pieces, Susan? I had that same question, Rebekah.
Oh, yeah. What are they?
Yeah, what are they?
Well, they're roofing paper that I ripped into the same size sheet that I use when I do newspaper. And then I had painted them and colored them with some pastels and speckled them with some paint and drew on them. And then as they get wet and then dry again, they curl.
Okay.
Which is what's a really nice thing about that. So I'll show you now. This is where they were when they were actually on a wall outside. And you can see how with the sun on them, they'd gotten wet. And then when the sun dried them, they all curled up. And then when it would get cool at night and the sun would go away, they'd flatten down again. So they were really very physical.
my God. They're like
So
leaves.
and yeah, there they are actually on the
Mm,
wall
mm.
looking at them. This is when I first had put it up on that wall. And you can see the color. I love the color of them. They look very much like, they look like the scales of a prehistoric being. They look like the roof turned on its side. I was curious how many things might start living in between them when it was outside for a while. So it's almost like their little home, these little spaces. If you think about the stories as children that we learned about the fairies that would live in the woods, and if you just found them, they'd disappear and you'd never find them again. But that kind of feeling. This was the first wall that I ever did, and this was at a gallery here in Westville. And this is all newspaper. So let's see if I can get one that's closer. So that shows you that what I was doing is taking newspapers and ripping them into 4 pieces, dyeing them with sumi ink, and then hanging them in the studio like laundry, letting them dry, and then taking them down, and then doing a whole nother set of them. And that is the very meditative part for me, is actually, that sense of hanging things, hanging laundry, watching my grandmother and my aunts hanging the laundry in the winter, and the sheets would freeze, and, just a lot of memory kind of stuff. And then this is another wall at Westover School. And this piece has 2,500 pieces of paper in it. And so to create that was so enjoyable, to just know I had a certain amount of things to do and I had to get them done by a certain time. And I figured it all out, how many I had to do each day in order to do that. And then to pack them all up, bring them there, and then hang them was part of the meditation. This is at another exhibit in Danbury, Connecticut. And I want to see if I have a picture of them before well, you can see here on this orange stuff down here, I hang that on the wall, and then I hang them on there with clothespins. I don't know if I have an installation shot right here, but let's go back to.
Love that piece so much. And that's at the Eli Center. This is outside the Eli Center.
Yeah, it's at the Eli Center now. It'll be there through November. I don't know why I'm having trouble getting out of this.
I love the physicality of it.
Wait, can we just look at this piece for a minute? This is just amazing.
Yeah.
It feels like leaves. It feels like feathers. It feels very natural, even though it isn't.
I know. It does feel very natural. And when you rub your hand down on it, you get this textural feeling. And on the interior ones where I did with newspaper, when you rub your hand on it, you hear this crunching. And also when you walk by it, they move as you walk by.
Well, and you some amazing like tree stumps too out of newspaper.
Yes, I have. I've done. Let me see. Let's get to some of that. The reason I couldn't get out of here is because the little video was covering up my thing. I've also done. So here's the picture of them actually hanging in my studio, and it gives me such pleasure to do it. It's almost like that's what I want to do more than actually finishing. And then when you were talking about the clothing, I also made a bunch of overcoats and suits out of newspaper that I dyed, and then I made sewed sheets of it together to create strips almost of fabric, and then cut those patterns out and created these.
We were in the same show, Susan, in the Art Walk in 2017 with I had 3 dresses in that show, and you had 2 or 3 of these coats.
Yeah, we'll get to. Let me show you those are now the thing. Wait, let me go back.
I remember that one.
Yeah, so this was, I originally had bought coats at Salvation Army, and I covered them with paper mache and had this show in West Haven. And then I took it down and I put them in dress bags and put them in my studio. And one day I noticed an awful lot of moths in the studio, and I opened up the bag and all these moths flew out. There must have been larvae or something in the coats. I don't know what it was, but I couldn't keep them. I mean, I had a terrible time getting rid of all my wool sweaters got eaten. It was awful. So Bill Fisher said, well, if you want to hang them outside at my house, you can. We'll just let them disintegrate. So that's what's happening here. And then I moved to doing just the all paper coats because I couldn't risk that with the moths again. But, you know, there's something about, I also had just had some pieces eaten by mice. And there's something about it that I haven't figured out yet what I want to do, but about that, the destruction of it by nature itself, and how I could do that in a way that would not draw mice, first of all. Because here in my studio, I had a piece that we had a mouse here that was eating it. So we had to, you know, I had to hang everything from the ceiling and keep it from the floor, or find, you know, rather than finding another way to do it that insects and mice wouldn't want, how could I use that in the work somehow? Trying to see. So this is what was in that show with you, Rebekah.
Yep.
And this was a serape that I made. Originally, I made it just to hang on the wall because I was influenced by that Annie Albers show at Yale Art Gallery and her fabrics that she had woven. But it just didn't, you know, once I did that, I thought, no, I've got to make this out of this piece that could be worn. And I made one side with the small pieces of paper and the other side with just kind of graphic images. And I just wanted to show you one other thing. So it's this house that I made, and I'm really interested in continuing with this process and making these small houses. And this one, when light shines in here, it makes bands of light on the inside. And this really started as an inspiration of a house, a closet in the house where I grew up in the attic, where when I didn't want to go to school, that's where I would hide. And of course they found me every single time. So it didn't really serve the purpose that I was hoping it would, but it did give me inspiration to do this, have these secret places. I just want to keep making these little secret places. And one other thing I did was a story about Banton Street in North Haven, and I did a photographic story for a class that I was taking. And Banton Street was a place where there had been a lot of houses, and there was such bad flooding, they ended up moving everybody out, and they tore down all the houses, and it's now part of one of the state parks. And everywhere you go, there are little hidden gems of things about the previous life that space had, like little stone walls or English ivy planted in some area, or little bits of fences that are still left over. And so it's got that same unique, Roy, you would love it. I don't know if you've ever been there or not, but you would love it.
No, I don't know that.
Yeah, it's really very interesting, along the Quinnipiac River in North Haven. So I want to continue exploring this feeling of spaces that maybe to draw people to them, spaces people didn't realize, like that piece at the Eli Center. You can actually go down the steps and walk on that paper. And underneath the paper, I just left all the leaves that were there. So when you walk on it, there's this crunching kind of noise, very textural, very a little bit scary, because you're going down and into a place, but then coming back up, it's this feeling of going back up the steps is I'm leaving that scary place behind. It's really, it's a very impressive, and the whole show is very much like that. It's a good show. And that's up until November. Okay, that's, I think that's it. I just wanted to also say that Roy and I also went to Weir Farm for residency. And for anybody who's thinking about getting a residency, it's really a wonderful one. It's a month, and you get your own studio, you get a place to live, and you just get this wonderful park full of history and full of beautiful landscape and rocks and water and trees. It's really great. That everybody should try and get to that.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm gonna have to apply to that one. Roy, what's for you?
Well, I think this work that I showed you is really a very new direction for me. Initially, I was very uh, doubtful about it because it felt a little gimmicky. But as I work with it, I'm finding things that resonate with me in terms of the sort of the process of perception and the the transient nature of the world out there that we think of as solid and forever.
Mhm. Um, well, and I've been concerned about that world that we think of as solid and forever, and it's really been bothering me that that I am putting essentially plastic on fabric as an art form, and so I spent some time researching like different more environmentally friendly painting options, and I ultimately, there are some things you can do with like buying pigments and mixing your own paints, and I'm not there yet as an artist at the place where I'm like ready to kind of find my own binder and really start from scratch like the old masters did. So, in lieu of that, I wrote to Golden Paints and explained my concerns about painting with acrylic, but which I have been doing because it's easy to clean up, it's easy to work with. I like to water down my paints a lot um, at times, um, and so I explained my concern about the manufacturing of acrylic and plastic and it being a petroleum product, and asked have they considered any bio-based alternatives. And they wrote me a very nice letter back and explained that they too are concerned about this and have explored bio-based plastics, but the problem is because they are compostable, they also, a mural will degrade on a wall or whatever and then disappear. So they suggested that I try their line of oil paints, and that I don't need to use turpentine or any toxic solvents to clean them up, that there are methods. They sent me a blog post all about these
Yeah,
methods of
yeah.
cleaning oils with linseed oil, so which is totally natural. So that what's next for me, once I finish up the stash of acrylic paint that I have, is to shift into oil painting, which I'm really nervous about because I have kind of developed all these techniques that work really well with acrylic paint, and I don't know how it will work with
Yeah.
oils. Who knows what will come out of that? But
I'm also doing a lot of drawing, and I'm not sure where that's going to go, but it's because I started teaching drawing. So, of course, I'm drawing because I'm teaching, but also because I have to know I have to be able to do what I'm teaching them to do. And it has really pulled me in some directions that I'm not quite sure how to do that in relation to this other work that I'm doing. Maybe it would be drawing on each one of those individual pieces of paper, possibly, and also I love using newspaper because and I only use the one New York Times because that's the paper I get, and it's fascinating to watch people when they're looking at that to see that they'll actually start reading it. And I realize I'm not really throwing away my paper. I'm actually using it for art. And I use Sumi ink, which is a natural ink. So that I'm happy to hear, what you're talking about. I feel like, oh, good, I'm kind of doing it, except for the plastic fencing. But I reuse it all the time. So,
wow, well, this is a really fun conversation. I'm glad
yeah,
That's
to
yeah.
great. That's
much, Susan. Thank you, Roy.